So I always like to say that I grew up in a very Huckleberry Finn kind of way. Very normal. We lived in a neighborhood. We had creek beds behind us and woods, and I had a lot of boys in my neighborhood. I would play with frogs, and I loved tadpoles, and we would go out in the morning and then come back before it was too dark. You know, I remember playing Barbies with my friend and she had the older brothers, and they were listening to, like AC/DC and Led Zeppelin. I just remember, like, very normal, what I would consider a fairly normal childhood. I have an older sister who's my business partner, and then I have a little brother that came along 8 years behind, and so he was kind of raised like an only child, but it was my sister and I for the first, I would say the first chunk of my life. We had a family company, what Hable Construction what we named ourselves after, and so it's funny when I start thinking about this, I go straight to playing with this monkey on my Aunt Susu's kitchen floor that flipped. You wound it up and it clapped the cymbals and flipped, and like a cloud of smoke above me because everybody smoked back then, and they had a very long house and a white brick fireplace. It was very modern with only the gas lit, and a white piano, and white and long, and anyway, it's so strange. And they had a very long hall, and we would bowl. These, plastic, we would bowl in this hall. But, I have to say, my father's family lived nearby, and my little town was, and still is, a sweet place. People who think about Texans, I've been asked a million times, did I have cows in my yard? No, I didn't have cows in my yard. I didn't ride horses as a child. My mom was a big horsewoman, but that wasn't how I was raised. And Catherine, my sister, who's always said that anything that I did as a child, my parents she would get in trouble for, but because I was the creative one, she said, if you hung naked upside down off a flagpole, they would just be like, oh, she's just so creative, and she would be grounded for the whole summer for the same thing. And so I didn't really see it that same way, but when I think back, I was my art or my personality, and my mother could see that I could do something. My grandfather, who was a crazy archivist, I guess I could say, he created a book of my work from when I was tiny. And I still have this book where I would send the artwork to him and he would grade it. So I'd get like A+++++. And, so we had this little back and forth through the mail. And so, they knew that I've always drawn. It didn't just happen, it's just always been just the way that I have been. It's just how, you always wonder how that manifests. And I can still remember, I don't really have a lot of distinct memories from my childhood, but I do have memories of art projects where I felt that I could have done better, or times, it was all related to art in some way. And, at school, and if somebody did something that I thought was better than mine, and that also, when I'm telling you this, it makes me think that how self-critical I am. I think that's just something that I always dealt with, is the inner voice. You know, I'm also a big thinker. I'm always trying to better myself. And if something is scary, I've always told myself that it's good for me in some way. You know, I have to really look at it. And yeah, putting your art out there is scary, but you know, the more I do it, the more comfortable I am with it. And the cool thing was, in my little town, there were two women who were very, very talented artists. One is a watercolor specialist, and the other was a color specialist. She did oil paintings. And so I remember in the 5th grade, her having private lessons for me. And the ladies, they would have, at least in one of the studios, I would go and help after school. And I'd sit she'd have classes, portrait classes, and I'd sit and I'd, you know, clean up the studio, and just, I was around them. And to have these two different personalities in town that were open to mentoring me or helping me, I mean, you know, oh, it's a small little town, but there are jewels in every little place. So I love that my mom, you know, really encouraged that and would pay for lessons for me, and just fostered my creativity that way. My mom has been pressing flowers for a very long time. The Strawberry Vine series came from these tiny vines that are wild strawberry vines that are grown in New Mexico. They had a home there for the summers, and so they are different than the wild strawberry vines that grow here or in Texas. And it wasn't until she started winding these vines and pressing them, and I found them in her. She has drawers of different types of specimens, and she does things with them because she's creative. She makes cards and does collage with them. But it wasn't until I saw those and then actually had her send those to me, and I in turn created this art from them, but blew it up really large. So I do, you know, it's funny how that little thing became these big, more abstract pieces, because that's how I saw them. I wanted my imagination to blow them up and simplify the shapes. Well, you know, from high school, my teachers and the artists that were in my hometown were very supportive of me going to art school. In New York, I wanted to go to Parsons. I was hell-bent. You know, that was the only place to go. And I have a father who went to West Point and thought, oh, that my child is not going to come from Corsicana, Texas and go straight to New York City. She'll be killed. Well, I beg to differ, but it didn't matter back in those days. So they encouraged me to get a liberal arts degree. So I went to a Southern college, studied art, actually studied graphic design, which is kind of interesting because I've never used it, but then I have, because I love gouache, and I think it's because I had to cut, you know, hand cut letters with an X-Acto blade, and I still actually enjoy that and use gouache. A lot of people do not like that medium. I think it's amazing. There's something so powdery and matte, and you can make the most gorgeous colors. So there are some things that I did get from that. And then I finished my credits up early, so I went straight to sculpture, and I did bronze casting. I used a chainsaw, and I welded. I was the only chick in my class. Then when I finished, I went straight to New York, and I went to Parsons. When I say I've attended Parsons, it is what people, you know, it's almost like a badge that you wear. It really didn't, you know, I did some figure drawing, which I love, and I loved being in New York. But I wouldn't say that was this huge pivotal point in my, career, or that made me something. I think it's, I actually think it's all of these different experiences I've had, and ways that I've had to solve problems and work in different mediums, and I think it's the years. I mean, I'm not getting younger. There are benefits to getting older. It's like having all these experiences, and then it starts enriching everything that you do and touch. And then for some reason with women, it almost validates you the older you get. So I feel like I'm just beginning my career, just scratching the surface. I think that's why I love what I do. Every day is a new day. I'm pretty much the same person, but there are so many different people inside of me, and not in a schizophrenic way. But there are so many things that I'm turned on by, and that I'm curious about. In my mind, I think that's what keeps you young. So, the word bored does not ever enter my vocabulary. I love my studio. I love being in here. I think it has great vibes. I think it has been one of the greatest things for me. I have the desire to work really, really large scale. I don't have the space here to do that. So I think there's going to be a time where I'm going to have to move out of this space if I want to do that. I think I haven't exhausted what I can do in here, and so I'm not needing that at the moment, but I love the idea of huge painted piece of paper. I mean, even, I look at, I went to the Matisse exhibit. I think it was at the Museum of Modern Art, maybe a year or two ago, and it was all of his collages. Well, I guess there were some paintings, but it was mostly collage, and they were huge. And I thought, oh my gosh, I mean, that sounds incredible to me. I think, the idea of them being so impactful, I think that's why even working digitally is so enticing, because things can get blown up. I mean, when I can't do it here, we can blow them up digitally, and which is fabulous, because just the flexibility of that to me is so cool. I might be able to make something small, but it could be ginormous. But I've always been very driven and, like I said, hypercritical of myself. It's something that I work on all the time. And being an artist is I bet I would say that most artists probably have that same characteristic. It's, one of the voices, those are one of the many voices that runs around in my head. And it's me always, digging for more inside myself. I am my worst critic, but I also am, when my intuition tells me that something is finished and I'm pleased with it, I can literally put it aside. And I am very content at that moment. I think I love working in India ink because I can get there with that medium. Stop before I wreck the negative space. It's like there is something about that medium that it's very final. So I love that. I think that's probably why I struggle with oil paint, because it, you can go on forever. The minute you retouch it after it's dried, you pretty much have to redo the whole thing. So it's this challenge. It's just a challenge. It's almost like a yoga practice. It's a practice. Athens, we had someone who worked for us in the studio in New York from Athens, and her sister has turned into one of my favorite collaborators. Her name is Ren Allen. She's a fine art photographer, but also does commercial work, and she and I have collaborated on projects. And she really, I think, gave the voice to Hable just through her photographs. We would come down here, and when we were still under snow and ice in New York, flowers would be blooming here, and it just was this natural element to our products and more of our maybe contemporary lines. And it's just that juxtaposition, which is very true to Catherine and I. It's like a little bit country, a little bit rock and roll, and we would have that. The photos would come back to us in New York, and it would just take our breath away. Our moving to Athens, Georgia was a big shift in our business. I like to think that we've had almost, not 9 lives yet, but we've had a lot of different lives. But the one consistent thing is that it's always been based on my art, and my sister's just has always been this die-hard cheerleader to whatever I would drum up in my head. But having this, Athens has given me this moment. With Hable in New York, I had my hands on fabric. I was touching everything. We were doing, I was in the stores, and I was expending my energy so differently than when I moved to Athens and I realized I didn't have all those places to put my energy. I started thinking, I've got to find something to do. I've just got to start painting again. It has afforded me this quiet and this space in my mind to wake up my art again as fine art. And so I've been here now 8 years, and I would say 7 of those, it's just me getting, back in the groove. And it's been incredible. I often go in my garden when I feel stuck, and I'll just wander around, and I've planted so many things, and my garden is maturing, and so I'm finding all these things. And for instance, I did a whole series of Helleborus. Well, those bloom when really nothing else does. And so one day I used pencil and this beautiful paper that I had, and it just came out of nowhere. It just happened. Well, I go back to flowers a lot. I feel comfortable with that just because, and nature. I have created a garden really as a place that I can constantly go back to, and it's always changing. So there's always something growing or dying, or, but I do go back to my garden. But there are a lot of plants out there, so it's not like, I have to look at those rose hips again. Oh, shucks. It's not like that. I was looking for a building instead of wanting to just build from the ground up. I don't know why I felt that I needed an old building. I live in a historic neighborhood. The historic preservation was not cool with bringing a historic building into a historic neighborhood, even though the vintage is the same as my house. We had to have a few meetings about that, and I had to jump through a lot of hoops. But I found this house and its brother. So I bought 2 houses for $500. That's what I didn't tell you yesterday. But it was a lot more. Basically we had to strip the house down and, to remove the house from the area, we had to basically clean the area after. So we harvested all the bricks from the footings and, all the wood. The wood is this beautiful 100-year-old heart pine. Cut the building in half, took the chimney out, cleaned the bricks. That's what we used for the footings and the staircase. Patched the hole where the chimney was with the remaining floors, ditched the floors that were rotten. It was basically, these houses were going to be used as arson practice. So I was able to buy them from the Chamber of Commerce. They wanted to know that the little town that I bought the houses from wanted to know that the houses were going to be used, not just harvested for the materials. And so they were so excited to know that that's what I was going to do. So we had to move the house. It was about an hour and a half away. We had to move the house in pieces to go down the interstate. And you couldn't move the pieces of the house when it rained. And the entire month, we had a month of a window because it was too narrow. We had planted our grass. We couldn't go through the yard. We couldn't go down the alley. So we had to go through a commercial building and then take down a fence to bring it on the property. You know, I had a lot of energy to do this one time. I don't know that I would do it again after doing it, but I'm so grateful for it to be here, and it was meant to be here, and it does serve me, and so I'm just, you know, thank God. But anyway, it would have to, you know, during a rainstorm, they'd have to pull off, and the house would be on the side of the road. And then another day, the guy would come, and finally we got all the pieces. We have it documented. We have all the pieces that were put back. I had to have the inspector come, and it was so rainy that the holes that the footers were in it was in this red clay that this house is on, and it was so... It was like the holes were full of so much water, and I remember scooping it with my children, scooping the water out so that so the inspection could pass. I mean, it was just insane when I think back to me with my galoshes scooping, and, you know, it was crazy. The whole thing was crazy, mayhem. And here we are, and I'm here, and I've been working here, and it's just, it's great. It's wonderful. I walk to work from my back of my house. You know, when I'm in here, I am in my world, so I don't feel like working in my yard is not, you know, I have worked inside my home before. It's very distracting for me, so I was concerned about that. But no, I feel very independent. I feel that it's been a luxury to be this close. I have young children, so it has been nice to be close, and it's ideal. And I kind of say that I've created my own vortex. I have. I've created my own little planet. You know, I have to get out of my vortex. You know, often I have to remind myself that I need to engage in the world. I can't isolate myself here. You know, I can be in the garden all day. I can be in the studio, you know, but I'm so grateful that I love where I am and that I feel good working in here. I made a choice last year that I was going to really do some radical self-care, and so I am on that quest so I can tamp down those critical voices. I mean, they're going to be there, and I think it's okay, but the level of criticism some of it doesn't serve me. So I think the yoga is part of tamping those voices down, because it's true, you know, it's not a very sustainable, happy life, beating yourself down every day. I think self-care means today, being here today. It sounds so trite, but physically, I spent a lot of early years, and I think it's probably because I have young children, but early years in our business, and then once my children came, I did everything, you know, it was output, and I never really took care of myself. I never carved time out for myself. It was for everybody else. My first child being the company and the business and what I needed to create to make that happen. And then once I had children, it was all about, you know, me caretaking for them. And so I'm at this stage where, you know, yeah, I still have children, I still have my business. I realize those things, and I have my husband. You know, I have things that are going to always take from me, but if I don't start giving back to myself, I'm just going to fizzle out. and I like myself too much to fizzle out, you know?